What's good, y'all? Back here today with another build video for Marvel's Avengers. This time we're taking a look at Jane Foster, aka the Mighty Thor. Jane, to me, I know I said something similar about Iron Man, but arguably one of the best characters in the game, maybe the best character in the game. When you talk about all the things she can do, DPS machine, can clear adds and mobs incredibly quickly, can support and buff her teammates, the traversal with flight and the ability to move quickly. There's really nothing that she can't do. Obviously, the newest character to the game, and in my opinion, one of the better designed and more fun characters to play in the game. So with that, we're going to get into the build video. Keep in mind, this is an end game build. You're going to see kind of a build that's set up for, 175 after you've already got a couple elite raids under your belt and everything. But also, as we go through this, I'll make sure I kind of show you and give some recommendations on pieces you can utilize when you're leveling Jane up. So we'll start with the stats first. This, for me, is a ranged build. It kind of evolved that way into a ranged build. Before that, I started as a hybrid, but kind of the deeper I got into playing Jane, and as I got her leveled up, I really decided I wanted to run her range. So here you're going to see a range focused build. So with that, you've got primarily precision and valor as your highest two stats. A little bit of might, just that's how some pieces rolled, and then a single roll of proficiency like I had on Iron Man. I really like a single roll proficiency on a lot of characters, not all of them, but Jane is definitely included there in terms of one of those characters that I like having a single roll of proficiency on. No resolve, one roll of resilience. I barely ever go down in raids unless it's intentional, when I'm trying to shoot the eye during a wipe or something. So I think once you get her all the way leveled up, you don't really need a lot of defense. There's a lot of other things you can do to survive. And then no intensity. Honestly, she can apply status so quickly in so many different ways that I don't really think it's worth carrying much or any intensity on her at all. So with that, we'll get into the build. We'll start with slot 1, and this one is going to surprise some people. These are the Hive Mind Gauntlets. So you can get these from either running the weekly Mega Hive, where you have to clear all 4 hives, that heroic gauntlet they call it, or you can get it from the No Rest for the Wicked Monica villain sector, the newer Monica villain sector. Precision and valor, you can see this is a 2-stat piece. Those are the stats I'm focusing on for the range build, and the first 2 perks aren't really very important because they're melee perks, and I'm not really using any melee attacks here. But that 3rd perk is what we're really looking for, that lightning potentiator that's going to increase shock status and shock damage by 20%. The reason we want this is Jane can do so much native shock damage, whether it's via her intrinsic, the All-Mother's Blessing, whether it's via the ultimate, and also the God Blast, that it's really just so useful to have this extra 20% both status application and damage. So really, to me, probably best in slot for her once you're all the way leveled up. That being said, I don't know if I'd recommend it early on because you just might not be totally geared out well enough and skilled out well enough to take advantage of it. So what I would do probably early on is go with something like a Faultless Spark here, like you can see here, status on Sig, because I think the Faultless Spark is nice because it can kind of help with heroic regen, and I'll kind of get into how to get that heroic regen going at a lower level. But I think that, or maybe like a faultless buff kind of piece, either would work. I don't have one in my inventory right now. If I did, I would absolutely show it to you. But similar kind of piece, but your first perk is faultless buff instead. That's going to give you a damage buff. So really, I think you either want spark or buff in that slot 1 while you're leveling. You could also do something like a attack surge piece. But these faultless spark or faultless buff pieces are going to be random drops. So the best way to get them is to just run content, open chests, play missions, that kind of thing in order to get them, or check vendors as well. But to me, I'd start with a faultless spark or a faultless buff, or you can, like I said, you can go something like faultless attack surge, but that wouldn't be my thing. If you're going to run melee and you're running melee attacks and you want status on signature for Thor and Jane is the quickest way to apply melee damage, arguably the best melee attack you could really have. So that's really what you want to look for there. Some other pieces that I have that I'll show you. This Faultless Pulse piece. Faultless Pulse is great during the stun phase against Claw. you just kind of run your SIG, and you've got that faultless pulse. It's going to go off a whole bunch and fill that stun meter really quick. So that's why I have a fully leveled up faultless pulse. And then you'll see these discordant pieces from the raid with status on signature. And really what you can look for here is if you're running a method to apply vibranium very quickly, like in my case, a payload that I'll get back to. Another way you could help with heroic regen is to run something like this that also has precision and valor for my range build, and then lethal vibranium conduit, because this lethal conduit combined with a heroic recharge perk is going to help you get your heroics very, very quickly. And help get it back very, very quickly. And I'll kind of show you how that works. So to kind of wrap it back all up again, because we went a lot of different places there, when you're leveling, I would start with either a faultless spark or a faultless buff piece, okay? When you get a good lethal conduit piece from the raid, I would move to that lethal conduit piece from the raid. And then kind of once you've got the rest of the pieces that I'll outline here in this video, I would move and go get this hive mind piece with precision and valor. If you're running ranged, obviously might and valor. If you're running a melee, or all three if you're running a hybrid build. With that, we'll get into slot 2. So slot 2, I'm really running 2 different pieces depending on situation, teammates, kind of what I want to focus on. The first is this, Grips of the Storm. This comes from either the Tachyon event, the weekly Monica villain sector, or it can also drop as a legendary version or occasionally an exotic version from the daily Tachyon mission. You can see here I've got Valor and Precision were the priority for me, but I got all 3, Valor, Might, and Precision here. Cosmic on power attacks, to me, best way to go. And then you've got targeted buff, targeted Tachyon surge. This piece, just arguably one of the best pieces in the game. Unicorn roll, super rare, super tough to get, but if you can get your hands on it, extremely worth it. The other piece that I mentioned that I'll go through is this targeted spark, Grips of the Storm. So similar to the other piece I just showed, but instead of that first perk being targeted buff, it is targeted spark, which gives you a heroic regen on ranged crits. And you know, the nice thing about this piece is it basically helps you run infinite heroics really efficiently. Now, if you can't get these pieces because they're extremely rare, there are other pieces you can get. But before I get into that, the reason I kind of want to call out these targeted perks, the spark and the buff and the target attack, is that Jane's ultimate, the all weapon, when it's flying around, can actually help proc these targeted perks. So even if you're running a melee build, it's a great piece for you to have because you've just got that hammer flying around passively, proccing all of those buffs for you, and then you can melee. So definitely want to get your hands on these pieces if you can, but if you're just starting out or you just can't get them because the drop rates are so crazy, then what I would do is you can run a regular targeted buff piece like this one you see here or this one you see here, or you can run a targeted spark piece here and kind of get that targeted spark going off from your all weapon. So what I do while you're leveling up, if it were me, is I'd probably have the targeted buff in slot 2. I'd go faultless spark in slot 1, and then you kind of have that heroic regen going. And what I do probably later as I kind of advance in the game is I'd still run targeted buff in slot 2, and then I'd go lethal conduit in slot 1. And that'll kind of help with the heroic regen. The spark might be overkill at that point as you kind of get stronger and you kind of are able to kill things more quickly and apply status more quickly. So again, I would go with the targeted buff piece slot 1, or slot 2 rather, targeted spark or faultless spark slot 1, but you could do it the other way around if you wanted to as well. But the end of the day, where you want to get is here. You want to get to this piece if you can do it. On slot 3, I am running this Discordant Battle Plate. This comes from the Elite Raid. Precision, Valor, Resilience, as you can see. The important perks on this, the second perk, Reverb Breaker, which is the 25% additional damage to enemies that have a Vibranium status effect applied. And then when you combine that with the ability to apply Vibranium quickly, which I have on a payload that I'll get into later, it's just super useful. It lets you do a lot of extra damage very quickly. And then what I'm actually looking for in this piece, I'm not done here yet. I'm trying to get this third perk to roll as what's called all weapon or ultimate extension, which basically increases the duration of your ultimate, the all weapon, by 8.5 seconds. So trying to get that third perk and this second perk together. RNG's been tough, so I don't have it yet, but that's really what I'm working towards as we get to the end of the game here. If you're looking for something you can run in the interim, and let me see, I don't think I have one in my inventory, but the OLT piece with a reactive cosmic surge, precision proficiency resolve, or might proficiency resolved, is a great option for you while you're leveling. But then when you get into the end game, you're going to want to move towards getting a piece that has this as your third perk, ultimate extension, and your second perk as reverb breaker. Getting into the fourth slot here, the fourth slot is really talked about keeping your heroics up with Jane. This is how you do it. So you're going to combine one of those spark perks or a conduit perk that I was talking about earlier with a slot 4 piece. This one is the Discordant Clasp. It's from the Elite Raid. And you can see the nice perks here, perk 1 and 2, Warrior's Fury Breaker. You're getting increased damage from Warrior's Fury. All Mother's Assistance, which is increasing your heroic charge rate when All Mother's Blessing is active, which is your intrinsic. So basically, while your intrinsic is active, you're getting an increased heroic charge rate. Now, given that this piece comes from the Elite Raid, you say, well, what do I do while I'm leveling? Well, you kind of have two options here. Number one, you can use this Belt of the Allfather. This comes from the Villain Sector, so you can get the legendary version from the Villain Sector. You can see you've got an increased heroic energy regeneration while overcharged. Definitely something you can do. Jane, not super easy to get overcharged, not super difficult either. So this one, even though it's got a bit higher of a rate, is probably not quite as easy to maintain your heroics. But the other option you have, going to be easier to maintain your heroics, but lower stats, is going to be the Wreath of Yggdrasil. This is an older version. The most recent patch actually changed that assistance perk to All Mother's Assistance, and I think the percentage is down to 1.8 instead of 3.2. So this is a legacy piece. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't have the new piece, or I'd show it to you, but it's very similar. This is another piece you can get from the Helicarrier Roy or the Daily Villain Sector, just like this piece right here. So this piece, all you have to do is hold your intrinsic when you pick up an orb, or hold your intrinsic when a spark perk gets procced, and it's going to fill that heroic meter up very, very quickly. So either of these two pieces, Belt of the Allfather, Wreath of Yggdrasil, those are what you're going to want in your slot 4 as you're leveling. And then the goal is to go get this piece with those first two perks, Warrior's Fury Breaker, All Mother's Assistance. Artifacts, I am running a triple Valor minor artifact in my first slot. Key here being that powerful boon, increased crit chance for power attacks. In my range build, I am using power attacks with my hammer, so I want that increased crit chance on the power attacks to help proc my payloads, help proc my targeted buff, help proc my targeted attack. So that's why I prioritize powerful boon here. If you're running a melee build, you'll want to use something that's got either Apex Breaker, which is increased damage from signature attacks, or Apex Boon, which is increased damage for, or increased critical chance for signature attacks. When I'm doing something like, let's say, if I'm DPSing Claw and I've got to put the Vibranium damage on him, then I would run one of these and one of these. You could also run a triple Might along with a triple Valor as well. You'll probably get a little more DPS out of just the hammer spins. I run 2 Valors because I will still attack with heroics and do the hammer spin. And then what you'd want to do in slot 1 is you come over here and you would run a Vibranium Sig from the raid, and that is really kind of how you take on Claw. You want Might and Valor, Sig on Vibranium, and then Sig attack perks with either 2 triple Valors or a triple Valor and 1 triple Might as well. Now, my second artifact that I'm running normally is a Pinpoint Vibranium Payload. This one has proficiency in Valor, so this is almost a perfect god roll. Only way it would be any better for me is if it had Precision as a third stat, but still great. This Pinpoint Vibranium Payload, these payloads basically on a range crit, you're going to basically have a payload that goes off and immediately applies a full bar of Vibranium status onto an enemy. So what's nice about that pairs really well with what I've got going on here in slot 3 with the additional Vibranium damage. And if I'm running a Lethal Conduit, which I don't always do now, but if I was, that would pair well with that as well, because then once I defeat that enemy, I'm getting that Sonic Conduit buff, I'm getting heroic and intrinsic regen, and so are my teammates. So that's why, to me, the payload on Jane is great. You could say, well, why not run 2 triple valors? Everybody kind of talks about that being the thing to do on Thor, but what I've found is, honestly, it's a little bit overrated. This has got Valor on it, and that pinpoint payload and the 25% damage you can get from it, the way you can quickly apply Vibranium, which is arguably the best status in the game, to me, it just doesn't make sense to run anything else here if you can. If you're running a melee build, what you can do is look for a faultless payload. That's obviously a faultless payload with range stats, but over here is a faultless payload with melee stats, Valor and Might. So really, faultless payload, if you're running a melee build, do it that way. It's a great way to get the job done in terms of applying Vibranium very quickly. When you're kind of fighting regular enemies, again, versus Claw, you're going to want to use a piece that actually has Vibranium as a status, because you're going to need to apply it on him the entire time. That's, major artifact, we're looking at the Sacred Nornstone of the Lethal Will. Since I'm running a damage buff over here, I want this because basically it's going to increase my crit chance, it's going to increase the length of my damage buff. If I wasn't, and I was running, let's say I didn't have a damage buff and I'm running a Spark build, then I'm probably going to want to run the Ring so that I can get my heroics back quicker from orbs, or I'm going to want to run the Darkhold so that I have that ability to just regen my heroics when they're completely depleted. But most of the time, I'm going Sacred Nornstone to Lethal Will because that's going to really help out my damage buff here. Getting into the skill section here, for my specialty skills, support heroic. First option here for Warriors Free, I'm always running Ymir's Wrath. We're giving our teammates a temporary damage boost of 25%. That's the way to go there. Not really another option to me. Could you go with the reviving option? I guess so, but I don't really feel like that's the way. I don't really feel like it's necessary. There's plenty of other things you could do. Or not plenty of other, this is just a much better option. There's plenty of other ways you could revive teammates instead of having this be the option. On this right side, this is where you have a little bit more utility here, or some choices to make. If I know kind of that I have to apply most of the damage and I'm running my targeted buff instead of my targeted spark, what I'm going to do a lot of the time is run Asgard's Fortune, which is going to basically give me a 50% chance to pick up a heroic orb when Warrior's Fury is active and I defeat an enemy. So that's a great way to get your heroics back very quickly. And again, you want that because Jane's heroics are so OP. But if I'm running my spark piece, or I'm kind of shifting into more of a hybrid support and damage dealing role, because I know I've got teammates that are doing a lot of damage as well, then what I'm going to want to do is probably go over here and use Hell's Anger, because that's going to give a 25% critical attack damage boost as well as a 10% crit damage buff to your teammates. So I kind of switch back and forth depending on situations. I would say most of the time I'm running this, but if I'm doing like a harm room clear, or again, I'm in a situation where I'm trying to pump out as much damage as possible and not necessarily support my teammates a little bit as well, then I'm going to go with this. Assault Heroic. I'm not going to cover this. I'm running the triple God Blast. If you don't know what that is, I'm sorry, I'm not going to explain it to you, but I'm going to tell you, just look it up. Google it, YouTube it, do whatever. Ask not on the official Discord, go ask on a different Discord. There's a way to just get 3 better God Blasts, and that's really all I'm going to say about it. Getting into the ultimate here. So the ultimate, I originally was running Seek True, which increases the damage of your hammer flying around by 20% and the speed of it. But what I've found lately is I'm actually enjoying Raw Uru more, and the reason is basically every time that hammer hits the target's getting hit with a bolt of lightning, and that's applying shock very, very quickly. And when I combine that with some of the perks I have, shock is a status that once it's applied increases crit chance against enemies. So when you combine that with my payload perks, with my targeted buff and targeted attack perks, or targeted spark perks, or even your faultless perks, having shock on an enemy is a really good thing, because it's really going to increase your crit chance, and it's going to help proc those buffs a lot more quickly. So that's why I'm going Raw Uru now, and I feel like that works really, really well with her. Looking at the right side, I'm using Unjarn's Bite. Sorry, I can't really say that well. Enemies defeated by it, though, have a 30% chance to drop a heroic orb. So again, between this, when I've got the all weapon up and I'm throwing my hammer, and this with Warrior's Fury, I'm generating a ton of orbs for myself and for my teammates and getting my heroics back really quickly while I'm still dishing out a ton of DPS as well. Getting into the mastery here, so combat-wise, I'm running Powerful Damage, increases the damage of all power attacks by 15%. Again, I'm primarily using power throws with my hammer, so that increased power attack damage is super helpful for me. Here I'm going Critical Juggler, increases critical attack chance when air juggling enemies by 15%. Little thing with this, the main reason I'm running it, watch what happens here when I change it to unarmed damage. See my heroic rating? Watch what happens when I change it back. So that's why I'm running that there. But I also do, when I do melee attack, it often is in the air. So, you know, I do like to have that perk up and going anyway, but that little added stat boost is just, you know, all the more reason to run it. And then here on the third side, or on the right side, I'm running Heroic Orb Takedown Mastery. Again, anything I could do to get heroic orbs and get my heroics back, because her heroics are so OP, you want to try to have that going and just make sure that that's the way right there. Looking in the range tree here, we've got targeting range. I'm basically making sure my hammer always hits a target when it's recalled, and the reason I'm doing that, again, when I'm throwing my hammer, I want to try to get crits. I want to try to get my buffs up as quickly as possible. The more I can kind of guarantee hits and get 2 hits there with my hammer when it lands and when it's coming back, it's just going to increase my chances of doing that. You could use something like target increase, and so you can kind of take more targets out. But I find that most of the time it's 1 or 2 hammer throws, things are dying anyway, so I don't really need that. Or I guess you could use a second pin, but I'm not really a big fan of Jane's pin ability, so I'm not going there. Middle tree, critical return. Again, so I said I'm looking to guarantee hammer hit on return, and then what I'm doing in turn is boosting the crit chance of that hammer on return. So these perks, there's really nice synergy between the two of them, where you can ensure you're getting a hit here, and then you're buffing that chance of it being a crit by 35%. The right side here, I'm just using range damage on the beam. Sometimes I'll shoot that beam when I'm flying towards an enemy. If they're really far away, why not get a little bit of damage? And this is that beam that when you're flying and you hit the R2 button, that Jane kind of shoots that beam out. Looking at the intrinsic abilities, I'm going with the Ionic Bolts. Just kind of gives you, you know, a little bit of extra, I guess, ability to kind of clear mobs and adds with lightning strikes. When you defeat enemies and All Mother is active, to me, that's just kind of my favorite in that tree. If you're looking for your lower level and you're looking for some survivability, Force of Will is great too, because you can have that open, you can deal some damage, and you can get some health back. So I recommend if you're a little squishy, you're having some trouble staying alive, you could use Force of Will and then eventually migrate over to Ionic Bolts. Center column here, I'm going Hone Force, just reduce that intrinsic cost so I have more intrinsic to use. That's really my preference there. Could you go with, you know, getting more intrinsic from a perfect dodge or increased speed? Yeah, I guess so, but for me, just having more of it is kind of my preference in terms of the way to go. And then on the right column here, I'm actually just using the speed burst. I like it because it just helps you traverse faster. You can hold X and get that little speed burst while you're flying. Use a little bit of intrinsic, but that's okay. And then the overcharge perks here, I like the charge damage. Again, I'm a ranged build here. I'm throwing my weapon a lot, so why not have an increase on throwing weapon attacks while overcharged? Middle column here, I'm going with the shockwave, basically increasing the force of the shockwave on thrown weapon attacks and makes them more likely to interrupt targets. So you can interrupt enemy attacks. That in turn is going to help you because you're not going to get attacked if you interrupt an enemy attack. And then on the last side here, just going with Goddess Shield, just gives you a little damage reduction while your overcharge is active. Not super necessary, but again, helps with survivability. I'm running pretty low defense anyway, so why not? And the other perks to me, melee attack damage. I'm not melee attacking. If I was running a melee or a hybrid build, I would probably use this instead. But since I'm not, I don't use it. And this third perk, the Shockwave Force, I mean, to me, not a ton of utility there. So that's not something I'm using. Champion, as we've talked about, In the Iron Man video, I'm always prioritizing perk chance, heroic charge rate, crit chance, crit damage, and then you can fill out some of these other columns. But these are your big four. Again, perk chance, heroic charge rate, crit chance, crit damage. That pretty much sums up the build. I will leave you with a brutal harm room clear I did, 195 enemies, exos, and adaptoids using this exact build so you could see it in action, besides the clips I showed you at the beginning of the video. Any questions, don't hesitate to hit me up in the comments. But, you know, again, Jane's one of the best characters out there. Level her up, get playing with her, and have a lot of fun, because once you get her built up, you're absolutely going to shred content and you're going to have a ton of fun. All right, thanks for checking this out.